It's a question that stirred debates for generations. A civilization that built wonders that still stand tall today. Monuments so grand they defy time itself. But beneath the legacy of pyramids and golden pharaohs lies a mystery that's gripped historians, scientists, and ordinary people alike. Who were the ancient Egyptians? Were they Black Africans? Were they Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, or something else entirely? Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to discover the real story, based on the latest scientific evidence, historical accounts, and what ancient Egyptians themselves left behind. This is the truth about the race of ancient Egyptians, finally solved. The mystery begins. The curiosity isn't new. Even in ancient times, people were asking this question. The Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled through Egypt in the 5th century BCE, described the Egyptians as having dark skin and woolly hair. His writings, though debated, remain some of the earliest outside observations of the Egyptian people. But then came centuries of reinterpretation. During the 18th and 19th centuries, European colonial powers dominated archaeology and scholarship in Egypt. They brought with them ideas rooted not in science, but in ideology. To many, a civilization as sophisticated as Egypt simply couldn't have been African. That belief wasn't based on evidence, it was based on racism. From museum labels to textbooks, Egypt was painted as separate from the rest of Africa. White marble statues were placed front and center. Black African contributions were either ignored or portrayed as foreign invasions. This rewriting of Egypt's image became the foundation of a long and toxic debate, one that continues in classrooms, media, and internet comment sections to this day. But to find answers, we need to shift the lens. Because Egypt is not just ancient, it's geographic. It lies at the intersection of Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, making it one of history's greatest melting pots. So maybe the question isn't were the Egyptians black or white, but rather, what made Egypt, Egypt? What ancient Egyptians saw in themselves. Let's look at how Egyptians viewed themselves. Their tomb walls are covered in color. And these weren't just decorative, they were symbolic. Egyptians painted themselves with reddish-brown skin. Men were often darker than women, perhaps reflecting outdoor labor versus indoor life. In contrast, their neighbors were depicted very differently. Nubians from the south were shown with darker, almost ebony skin and tightly coiled hair. Libyans had pale skin and blue eyes. Asians from the Levant were painted with yellow or light brown tones. The Egyptians weren't just using skin color to show race, they were showing identity, geography, and cultural affiliation. And this is crucial, the range of physical features in their art, broad noses, narrow chins, high cheekbones, curly and straight hair, shows that ancient Egypt was not racially homogeneous. Their sculptures and murals tell a story of people who were diverse in appearance, yet united under one powerful cultural umbrella. To the Egyptians, race wasn't what mattered. Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order and balance, was what mattered. The power of DNA, what science reveals. Fast forward to modern times. In 2017, a team of scientists achieved what was once thought impossible. They extracted and analyzed ancient DNA from Egyptian mummies. This was groundbreaking. The mummies came from the site of Abu Sir el-Melek in northern Egypt and dated from 1400 BCE to 400 CE, spanning over 1,000 years of history. The results were surprising. These ancient Egyptians had the most genetic affinity with populations from the ancient Near East, modern-day Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey. In fact, they were more closely related to Europeans and Middle Easterners than to Sub-Saharan Africans. At first glance, it seemed to support the idea that Egypt wasn't very African. But here's the catch. These mummies were from the late period, long after Egypt had been conquered by foreign powers, the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. This was not the Egypt of the pyramids or the early pharaohs. It's like trying to understand Native American ancestry by sampling people in New York City today. The population had changed. Other archaeological and skeletal evidence from Upper Egypt and Nubia regions closer to the African heartland show earlier populations with strong African traits. And remember, the Nile didn't begin in the Mediterranean. It flowed from Africa from the deep south. So Egypt's earliest peoples almost certainly came up the river, not down. In short, the DNA told us something, but not everything. Egypt's African roots. Now let's talk about what most history classes still overlook. Egypt's deep African identity. The very foundation of ancient Egypt, its religion, architecture, rituals, and even the pharaonic system bears the fingerprints of African civilizations. Take the early dynastic periods. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the moment Egypt truly became a nation, came from the south, from Upper Egypt. That's the part closest to modern-day Sudan. And guess who lived just beyond that? The Nubians, a powerful African kingdom with its own gods, language, and traditions. Far from being outsiders, Nubians were often intertwined with Egypt, sometimes as allies, sometimes as rulers. During the 25th dynasty, known as the Kushite dynasty, Nubian kings ruled all of Egypt. Pharaohs like Taharka and Pi weren't seen as invaders, they were crowned as legitimate sons of Egypt. And they weren't pale-skinned conquerors either. They were clearly African and proud of it. Even today, Nubian culture in southern Egypt still reflects ancient traditions. The connection isn't lost. It's still living. Why the debate still matters. So why does all of this matter? Because history shapes identity. When people are erased from the story, especially Black and African people, it impacts how generations see themselves. For centuries, Africa was portrayed as a continent of tribes, not civilizations. A place of wilderness, not science or structure. Egypt was the exception, but only when separated from the rest of the continent. That's why reclaiming Egypt's full identity is important. Representation matters. When African children grow up learning that one of the world's greatest civilizations was theirs, that the pyramids, the temples, the gods, they weren't foreign. They were homegrown. That changes everything. It's not about excluding anyone. Egypt was a global crossroad. Its history belongs to Africans, Arabs, Europeans, and more. But denying its African foundation, that's not truth. That's erasure. So let's answer the question once and for all. What race were the ancient Egyptians? They were African, but they were also Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, a civilization shaped by geography, trade, war, and time. They weren't just one thing. They were many things before the idea of race even existed. Trying to force ancient Egypt into a modern racial box is like trying to read hieroglyphs with a calculator. The truth? Egypt was a bridge, a fusion, a glorious, golden blend of Africa and the world. And in that complexity lies its beauty. Thank you for watching. If you learned something today, or if this gave you a new perspective, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with others. Let's keep this conversation alive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep unmasking history.